It is now my pleasure to welcome you to the Upstream Oil and Gas Improving Enterprise Performance Webcast. I will now turn the call over to Mr. Chris Beam. Sir, you may begin.
Thanks, Beth. Hello and welcome to our Energy Executive Briefing Webcast series, where we've been briefing you on the latest energy, retail, and utility trends in North America. I'm Chris Beam, a partner and lead of our North American utilities of SunGard Global Services Energy Practice. Over the last couple of years, SunGard Global Services has hosted webinars on a variety of thought leadership topics, including the zonal to nodal changes, Texas SET, trade surveillance, and last year we even had a very popular series on Dodd-Frank legislation. We continue to hear from our clients and interest in hearing about these current hot topics, and hence this latest series that we're going to talk about today. So these are designed to be interactive, so we will have a questions portion, as Beth mentioned, and be collecting those online as we go through the topic today. So as well, if there are other topics that you would like to hear more about, please feel free to type those in as well, and we will make sure that we address those in upcoming webinars. In today's webcast, we'll explore the two biggest challenges within oil and gas companies. One, the growing data volumes in upstream, and secondly, the required visibility into company performance, such as production, capital expenditures, and other key performance indicators. I'm pleased to introduce with us today is Rothan Raval. Rothan is a partner of SunGard Global Services and leads our information management practice. Under his leadership, the information practice has provided energy and financial services companies with productivity growth, efficiency gains, and cost optimization consulting through a variety of strategic applications and data management disciplines. Rothan has been with SunGard, or has been providing this over the last 12 years. Also with us is Tufan Ericon. Tufan is a principal with SunGard Global Services and very much a leader in the upstream industry. He's got over 20 years of experience, and the last 15 has focused on information management, and specifically with some very large global customers. So let's talk real quickly about a couple of the things we're going to hit on today's agenda. First of all, we want to hit on why does strategy execution fail. Secondly, we'll talk about our approach to business value. Then we'll shift to CPM adoption and best practices and maturity framework before we highlight approach to some dashboards as well as some examples. Finally, we'll talk about building a scalable data foundation and what the call to action should be. And as I mentioned before, we'll end today's session with a question and answer session designed to go deeper into any of the topics that anybody would like to hear more about. So please feel free to submit your questions as we go through. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Tufan. Tufan?
And Tufan, if you could unmute your phone, please.
Oh, sorry, I've been. I'd like to thank you, Chris. I'd like to start with companies and how they go about executing their vision. According to the research from Strategic Performance Measurement and Management, almost all companies, 97% of the companies, have a vision. They have defined a vision. However, only 80% of companies have actually clear strategic plans. And only half of these people, these companies, have actually some strategic execution against their strategic plans and vision. And only 33%, just 1/3 of all the companies, achieve significant strategic execution against their plans. So why does that happen? Why do companies fail on execution? We have several barriers. I mean, there are some of them listed on this webinar. If the strategy is not clearly defined, and the attributes and if they're not clearly defined, or the strategy is not tangible, you run into several barriers. First of all, the vision barrier, right? We have to take into consideration things like, what is the company's vision? What's our business strategy? How do I impact execution of the strategy and the vision? And things like, how do I use the new information to adjust our strategy? And our research shows only 5% of the workforce really understand the company's strategy. Secondly, there's some management barriers. Things like, how do I provide meaningful, timely feedback to employees? What systems and measures should be in place? How do I free up time to focus on strategic issues? And how do I set proper expectations with users? And again, 85% of all the executive teams spend less than 1 hour per month discussing strategy. That's not enough. And talk about resource barrier, right? Every company has the same challenges. What technology will allow us to link planning and measurement? This is hard to do. And things like, how do I ensure people have the right information at the right time? And how do I ensure the new approach is better in the user's eyes? And 60% of all companies don't link their budgets to their strategy. And lastly, the people barrier. Things like, what's my financial stake in the company's success? How do I align my objectives with the company's strategy? And things like, what can I control to drive the company's economic success? And lastly, why is it fixed if it's not broken? And only 25% of the managers have their incentives linked to the strategy. So those are the biggest challenges with regards to execution of the strategy. So how do we solve this problem? How do we start executing against the strategy? It's going to require measurement. But how do you take something like a strategy and turning it into something tangible, key performance indicators, and start measuring this? And most companies do a good job translating their vision into a strategy. Now, again, like I said earlier, execution against that strategy is difficult because most of the measures are financial and lag indicators. They report on outcomes, the effects of past actions. To create a management process to implement strategy, you first have to construct a reliable and consistent framework for describing and measuring the strategy. And companies need a process for measuring the strategy execution against tangible and intangible assets. What is required is a clear idea of the cause and effect linkages, the strategy's hypothesis that can be communicated to everyone in the organization. In 1998, E&Y had a survey of 275 portfolio managers, and they all reported that the ability to execute strategy was more important than the quality of the strategy itself. So after this introductory concept of strategy definition and execution, I would like to invite Ratan to talk to us about fundamental approaches to achieving goals. Ratan?
Yeah, Tufan, thanks for that introduction into how companies have a vision and how they're able to translate it into a strategy. But more importantly, the execution of the strategy and the key differentiators in terms of why some strategies are successful from an execution standpoint and some are not. And what we have seen working in this industry for multiple years now is essentially two different types of approaches to a business-wide, enterprise-wide solution. The first is a value-driven program approach, and the other is an organizational goals-driven program approach. Well, the former, which is the value-driven program approach, is heavily centered on understanding the key growth drivers that the enterprise has, as well as the impetus that they have in terms of creating a market differentiation for themselves, and the ability to translate that key growth drivers into chunks of very small, measurable actions that the business will take in step with IT around initiatives that will provide visibility into those measures and metrics. And the key differentiator of a value-driven program approach is that the tools, processes, and procedures that are selected and applied are based on what difference does it make for the business from a key business growth driver standpoint. And the organizational goals-driven approach is a very IT-centric approach. It's centered around key IT disciplines of data governance, data management, integration, quality, and things of that nature. And more often than not, the success associated with the execution of those strategies is either based on IT goals or industry goals. And to that effect, there is a loose linkage with the business growth drivers, and there is also a loose linkage with the IT customer services and efficiency goals. So one of the key questions that we all need to ask ourselves is, for clients that we are working for or for clients themselves, where do we fit in this spectrum? Because when we look at the successes that are achieved by employing either one of those two strategies, the gap in terms of ROI is huge, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next slide, is an industry trend in terms of what folks are able to achieve through the application of a value-driven program approach. From a expectation standpoint, in terms of the wider industry trend, any enterprise-wide solution that's focused on providing quality information to business in terms of actionable decision-making, there are proportional productivity gains that happen based on information quality. And most folks try to achieve the green line, and they end up achieving the blue line. And one of the biggest differentiators, apart from the ability to manage change that's going to be pervasive to the organization, and the ability to define what's fit for purpose, is the value-driven program approach. Organizations that have a value-driven program approach are very closer to the green line versus organizations that are very organizational IT goals-driven in the execution of their strategy, and they end up being on the blue line. There is an industry trend that says that as part of your corporate performance management, if you're able to improve your information quality to the extent that you only have about 1 to 5% error rate at the data feed level of the key data attributes that are used for actionable decision-making from the business standpoint, you stand to achieve north of $8 million in productivity gain. So when we talk about for corporate performance management today, when we talk about the ability to execute the strategy through very measurable business actions that are supplied by information innovation, it's very important to understand that it's important to understand that we need to track good data versus all our good data. And that's the focus of corporate performance management. And as SunGard, the data framework that we have put into place, information management artifacts that we have put in place, help our clients drive efficiency and growth. So let's take a look at what a value-driven program approach looks like. The value-driven program approach looks like where you take a key business driver and you try to break it down into different tiered values based on the different levels of organization. This is a real-life case study of an energy giant that decided to go on a value-driven program approach. They took their financial objective, which was a total shareholder return value, and they tried to break it down into smaller chunks of measurable business actions in terms of information innovation. And they went on the path of defining smaller steps of execution in terms of measures and metrics that they could supply to the business and track business actions based on that. The results were pretty stunning. They were able to through their reporting, data management, and business process improvement, they were able, over 5 years, gain about $60 million in productivity and efficiency gain. This paid for the software implementation by 4x. So the purpose of today's call, Tufan is going to walk us through corporate performance management that's really value-driven. What are some of the best practices around that? What are the methodologies that clients typically, should employ in terms of corporate performance management? What are some real-life insights into starting small while keeping the big picture in mind? So Tufan, can you walk us through those?
Thank you, Ratan. Okay, so let's start looking into some corporate performance management. First of all, success is in the eye of the beholder, right? Success is defined by the program or the customer, not by the industry. In order to make CPM successful, you have to have quick incremental wins that are required within a shared vision. Tools, processes, procedures, they will help, but they do not really drive the success. And do not underestimate the experimentation, agile with vision. So small iterations definitely help. Maturity models, which we're going to talk about, they are very useful to drive discussion, and they enable measuring progress, but they are not the goal or a driver, right? And metrics, that needs to be tightly linked to the corporate strategy and objectives, and we're going to talk about this later. And benchmark against the competition with regards to key metrics are also important. And what's really important is for you to be able to take the high-level metrics and clearly push it down in the organization, down and around the organization. So entire organization has to be in sync with the executive vision, goals, objectives, and initiatives. So let's look at the CPM methodology that SunGard has in place today. This methodology consists of 9 components and 3 major categories. The first one is formulation, the next one is measurement, and lastly the accountability. And of course the strategy formulation, the formulation starts with the formulating the strategy, and then things like, what's our strategy and what are our objectives, how are the objectives related. But what's really important is beyond talking about what we want to achieve, we also have to think about how we will accomplish this, right? That's our number 1 box on the strategy formulation. On the second piece, we talk, by the way, a lot of companies already have the strategy maps in place, which I'm sure you all have seen this. There's 4 layers of the strategy map, which starts with the drivers and then outcomes. As Ratan mentioned earlier, at the very top there's a financial outcome, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then you go all the way down into how do we go about doing this? This is the financial outcome, the customer perspective, the internal, and then people perspective. So go into details of all that and come up with the right strategy, describing the strategy. Now, as I mentioned, when we were talking about strategy, you also have to talk about your objectives, and your objectives have to be balanced across perspective. It has to be pushing organization beyond the status quo. It has to be actionable, measurable, concise, and has to relate it to expose the cause and effect relationship, the outcomes that we are trying to drive using the drivers that we have. And of course, then all of these drive the KPIs. KPIs should serve as a mean of strategic communication, focusing the attention on strategic issues at hand. When you drive KPIs, you look at things like KPI has to make a strategic objective more explicit, timely, and actionable, right? Every objective should ideally have 1 or 2 measures. And you have to balance this KPI between leading and lagging measures. And it has to, if you have a KPI that's very complex and nobody understands, that's not a good thing. And KPIs have to be easily quantifiable. It may be subjective, but it needs to be quantifiable. And each KPI should have a target goal defined, and target should reflect a stretch from what you're looking for, right? And relative targets are possible, as well as you have to have an accountability assigned to each KPIs and objectives. And of course, the featured vision strategy drives initiative rationalization. This is box number 3. What we do is we talk about initiatives are the specific activities like programs, projects, etc. that an organization takes to meet the objectives outlined in the strategy map. You have to perform an inventory of all the current initiatives. You have to directly link initiatives to the objectives that they support. An initiative should drive improvement in strategic KPIs. An objective may have multiple initiatives associated with it, and you have to highlight the objectives without supporting action items. And of course, this drives the rationalization of the initiatives. So you have to differentiate between tactical and baseline from strategic initiatives, and you have to prioritize all the initiatives on a strategic fit and value, right? And you have to discontinue initiatives that are lacking strategic linkage. I mean, that's just money wasted. Just all of your resources are going into this that really doesn't add up to anything. And you have to have the right, adequate funding for the initiatives. And again, you have to assign accountability to each initiative. And the strategy drives initiative management and strategy reporting. We have to also monitor in-motion initiatives. Once the initiatives are approved, the PMO office is usually responsible for tracking progress throughout the development lifecycle. Data points include things like delivery dates. This may impact KPIs, right? scope changes, budget issues, project risk, milestones. These are some examples of data points that PMO tracks. And then we have to provide visibility to those depending on the initiatives. And a scorecard like things bring together a snapshot of all the relevant and strategic information for the company and the business units. The key data points on the scorecard like this is KPI performance, usually targets versus actuals, and strategic initiative status, strategic initiative prioritization as needed, and then relative drivers, whether it's non-controllable macro drivers or not. And you have to discuss on what are the drivers of the outcome and what are the action plans that's required to right the ship, to correct course, right? And lastly, on our box number 6 here, we talk about the performance management. How do we, the strategy reporting scorecard usually provides you an overall feedback on the performance of the organization. It can also be used for individual and group performance management. And you can, as I mentioned earlier, take the big strategic goals and then break it all the way down into the organization. You have to cascade all the objectives down to the individual level. It may even be appropriate to have like personal scorecards. And to cascade the employee scorecards from strategic objectives. And like I said, every person in the company needs to know how they contribute to the bottom line on that strategy, right? And lastly, the financial planning. The strategic objectives, they drive the financial plans. In this case, the multi-year plan and the rolling forecast. Strategy is the driver of all financial planning processes, and it must clearly define the organization goals, things like what, who, when, how much, etc. Right? The best practices for planning include long-term targets that stress the organization, and then short-term targets that establish the long-term trajectory. And then you have to have bottom-up involvement to validate the feasibility of the targets. And all of this going into the rolling forecast and the multi-year plan. The financial planning progress processes are directly connected to the strategic objectives and KPI targets established by the executive management team. The rolling forecast aggregates all of this into a multi-year plan. And you have to have scenario-based modeling. You have to take the macro driver assumptions into consideration because they impact strategy. And you have to have the controllable KPI targets fed from the strategy. And finally, on the CPM data sheet, you have to leverage data to guide your strategic decision-making. Strategy drives the need to understand not only KPI results, but also very specific data sets that add context to why these hypotheses are proving true or false. Data with rich dimensionality, this is very important, such as segments, channels, geographies, etc., will provide deeper insight into the customer behavior and desires. KPI results, the following, you have to take this into consideration to support the strategic decision making, right? Things like KPI results, supporting granularity for KPI. So if there's any question with the KPIs and the numbers, you have to be able to drill down into details and have all the granularity behind all that. So I know I went through this whole CPM methodology really fast, but as you can tell, there's a lot of content behind each one of these boxes, and we have a framework that takes you through every single one of them and taking a strategy all the way down into the performance management. How do you make progress against that, and how do you measure progress against that? So let's talk about some defining metrics best practices. So a lot of the metrics defined by a business area, but people don't take the target audience into consideration. For example, when you talk about a simple metric such as ROI, right, it may mean something different to finance than operations or an HR, right? For that reason, what we call is we create something called a matrix, and basically just for each metric that you have in place, you have to direct the audience, and then it creates this matrix of what it means for what. And secondly, you have to collect the KPI levels and at the plan level, and also you have to calculate the variance to the anticipated target value that we talked about earlier, right? You have to manage the business expectations through this variance on supporting metrics indicators. You have to communicate these metrics consistently down and across the enterprise. Everybody has to be on the same page when it comes to definition of a metric. And if possible, you have to get information to subject area domains as opposed to selected data sets, so it will serve more than just a select group of users. A lot of the organizations already have all of their KPIs identified, and whether it's well defined or not, but if not, there are some guiding principles on how do you come up with some KPIs. First of all, you have to focus on strategic issues. I think I've talked about this like maybe 3-4 times so far. It has to support the company's strategy. Your KPIs have to be reliable and repeatable. Your KPIs have to have a specific frequency of an update. And you have to set targets, although this could be stretch targets, and to establish meaningful improvement and accountability. And you have to be consistent with the availability of this information to everybody in the organization. Usually each objective have 1 or 2 KPIs, and here's a list of some attributes of a well-defined KPI. Linked to strategy, quantitative, accessible, easily understood, counterbalanced, relevant, actionable, and it has a common definition. Let's talk about SunGard's Corporate Performance Management Maturity Framework. Our framework consists of 3 key dimensions. The first one is the business enablement. This dimension describes the advancing nature of the types of the business needs, problems, and capabilities that are being delivered in information solutions. On the second dimension, that's the program management. This describes the advancing nature of the people, process, and technology management skills as a key enabler and catalyst for success. And lastly, on the technology enablement side, we describe the nature of the information solutions that serve a variety of business needs, problems, and capabilities. The function of the maturity model is it represents a framework for long-term success that's a function of all 3, the business enablement, technology enablement, and program management. This highlights a critical emerging need for a new breed of talent and leadership, namely program manager, business architects, information architects, that can guide the iterative phases of the integration and high-value subject areas within the information management. We can go through some details if you look at some of the levels. For example, on the business enablement side, level 1 is running, where it talks about having reporting and cascading, reporting on spreadsheets and commonplace, and most of the executives and managers are the consumers of this information, and it's very periodic, like quarterly or monthly. On the technology side, you really have early ETL processes. Maybe you may or may not have a data warehouse solution in place, and most solutions can be manual. And on the program management side, you have limited project management discipline, very limited BI skills, etc. But as you go through level 1 through level 5, in all 3 of these areas, you improve and get better and better. So we focused a lot about KPIs, and let's talk about how do you make this available to people. And dashboards are the best way to do this so far. It's easy to do, and it's very if it's well defined, it's easy to understand. But several things that you need to pay attention to when you create a dashboard. First of all, dashboards have to be aligned with the strategic objectives, and it has to be active. And dashboards have to be integrated into the regular management rhythms, right? Things like target setting, the initiative funding, or management performance reviews. And you have to have accountability assigned for each dashboard inside to somebody. Now, it's very easy to start a dashboard and then throw a lot of things at it. So all of a sudden your dashboard becomes basically a report of 100 metrics. You can't do that. You have to think big, but you have to start small. You have to start an initial focus area that has strategic significance, and you have to have the metric thresholds that we talked about, targets, below targets, above targets, etc. And you have to prototype and validate the data before publishing. This is very important. If you are not sure about the numbers, do not put this dashboard in front of the customers, because once you lose the end user confidence of the data, you are going to you might as well just kill this corporate performance management initiative, right? Because nobody's going to look at it, and people are not going to come back and take that into consideration for any of their management, performance management or metrics. The last thing that you have to pay attention is you have to put few metrics on the dashboard. Don't make it a very complicated dashboard with a lot of metrics. If you put a few metrics, but look for some hidden gems and leading indicators. Things like things that indicate the future outcomes, right? Things like forecasted production volumes in case of upstream, reserves, or preventative or predictive maintenance. And lastly, you have to reevaluate the relevance of the chosen metrics on a regular basis. Just because a metric made sense for this performance period, it doesn't mean it's gonna be valuable for the next. Okay, let's look at a sample dashboard that we have built for one of our upstream customers. In this case, I highlight 4 different sections of a dashboard. This was a dashboard that we built based on, after we went through a corporate performance management CPM assessment, and as a result of this assessment, we came up with a scorecard of what do we measure with regards to, for executives, for example, that audience, or for the VP of operations, or for the VP of finance, etc. So we came up with this set of metrics and this dashboard. Let me just walk you through this very quickly. It's actually pretty simple. The first dashboard talked about the enterprise KPIs. And this just showed how is my performance overall from an enterprise point of view. It showed most critical KPIs driving short-term incentive amounts. This was their bonus plan. Literally, just every person in the company had a component that was tied to this. And these metrics here are production, how much do I produce, reserves, how much do I have in ground, EPS, earnings per share, cash flow, how much money I have, and lastly, F&D cost. How much money am I spending for all the planning and development related activities? Each of these metrics had a weighting on the total calculation, and each of these metrics also supported one of the strategic goals of being a high-growth company and being a low-cost company, right? You can see those little orange boxes and yellow boxes that kind of showed which metrics it ties from the enterprise perspective. The second one was the operations-related metrics, which was all about production, right? The volume that's produced and the revenue that's generated based on that. In this case, we have looked at monthly volumes by the product type, whether it's natural gas, NGL, or crude oil, actuals against budget or forecast against budget. And you had the ability to be able to drill down into the different parts of the organizations. In this case, this was an international company. When you click on one of the drop-downs that talks about total company, it breaks it down into U.S. operations and Canadian operations. Within U.S. operations, you will see the Texas. Within Texas, you will see even further down details. On the Canada, same way. If you choose a Canadian section, then you have the option of seeing the production revenue in U.S. dollars versus Canadian dollars. And on the next dashboard, we talked about the capital spending. Again, the same way, you can take a look at all of your capital spending in a monthly basis, actuals against budget or forecast against budget. And you will see the annual lines, just like on the operations side. How is each month's performance affecting the annual line? And as well as this had one more drill down into the spend type. For example, in this case, when it comes to capital spending, you could have just focused on completion costs or drilling and completion costs or things like facility costs, lift holes, or pipelines and facilities, etc. This gives you the ability to be able to focus on a certain part of the company and certain part of the spending. And lastly, on the expense management side, we talk about for each unit of volume produced, where am I spending the most money on, right? Where is my LOE cost, G&A cost, production cash and operating margin, and my interest expense and DD&A, etc. Those type of expenses broken down into, again, by individual parts of the organization. You can drill down into the different levels as well. So what SunGard offers, this is our information architecture for the upstream area. We always talked about this top part, the pyramid, where you start with the enterprise scorecards and you drill down into business unit scorecards and dashboards, and then go further down in the pyramid, you get more granular and the audience increases. But in order to have this in place, you have to have this data foundation at the bottom that takes the data from the source system one time and then bring it into an integrated area where you can keep track of all this data and integrate and cleanse and all that, and then put it on top of that. You can put what's called a data mart layer, which basically restructures data in a way that you can run fast and simple queries. This information architecture here enables for you to be able to take all those metrics from the strategy all the way down into finding KPIs and then measure progress against it. What's really important is at the bottom on the data foundation layer, you have to have a very scalable and flexible model. You can use something like a PPDM or a PPDM-like data model. You can develop your own data model, but again, like I said, it needs to be very flexible and scalable. In this case, in more technical terms, it needs to be normalized, and we have developed some of these data models for some of our clients. In this case, we've gone through a lot of the content, and I'd like to pass it on to Ratan. And Ratan is going to talk to us about all of our what is next steps and call to action. Ratan?
Thank you, Tufan. Thanks for walking all of us through corporate performance management, best practices, lessons learned, insights, and actually walking us through a few scorecards as well, trying to showcase how CPM could be in action, could be in flight. And also thanks for walking us through the scalable data foundation that's required for corporate performance management. What we offer at SunGard is a quick assessment of the maturity of CPM at our clients, basically helping our clients understand where they are with regards to how the wider industry is performing on that. Are your investments reversing you back to the mean, or is your information strategy indeed a game changer? How you can convert an organizational goal-driven strategy into a value-driven strategy. For questions like this and many more, we offer a complimentary workshop that allows you to quickly understand where you are, where you want to be, and more essentially, the practices that you're putting into play, how are they in comparison with the wider industry, essentially benchmarking yourself against the wider industry. So please feel free to call us for this complimentary workshop that will allow you to gain an understanding of the maturity of CPM within your organizations and how you can take that forward and really create the differentiation for your business in the marketplace. Christine, I would like to turn it over to Christine and see if there are any questions that we could go about.
Thanks, Ratan, and a very good summary of the call to action. Folks, like to take a few minutes. If you have questions, please feel free to submit those online at this point. And we'll start off by going through a few of the questions that we've collected throughout the course of the webinar today. And we do have a couple that have queued up. The first one is actually, will this will a copy of this webinar be available? So I wanted to let all the attendees know that, yes, absolutely, we will be making a copy of this webinar available. That includes the slides and the voiceover that you've been able to participate in today. So you will automatically, everybody who's registered for this call will automatically get that. And if you have any questions, again, please feel free. We'll leave a contact information following the Q&A and prior to the feedback form. So again, yes, absolutely, you'll be able to receive that. One of the next questions is actually a two-part question. Tufan, if you want to start, and then let Rothan provide his feedback as well. The question is, what's a typical time frame for part one? Is a project like this? What do you see, and what's indicative of clients that you've helped? And then secondly, how long would this type of would an assessment for this take?
Well, that's a great question. Let me start with the second part of the question. Usually we start on these with an assessment, and assessment, what it does is it takes our maturity model and we evaluate all 10 different dimensions of the organization, and we come up with a score for the organization. Where are you today? We come up with the as a state, and then we also interview all the executives and their business unit leaders and come up with their needs and where do they want to be as far as the future state goes for the corporate performance management. What do they want to measure? How do they want to measure? Where do they want to be? That will kind of define us, where we are today and where they want to be. And then clearly it's not that just as easy as, flipping a light switch going from as is to B. We come up with a roadmap that takes the big picture into consideration, but starts with small increments and get them from where they are to where they want to be in small increments while providing immediate ROI, right? So that piece is the assessment, and that usually, depending on the size of the organization, it takes anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks for that assessment piece. Now, once we have that roadmap and all the components of the roadmap, what initiatives do we need to be in that roadmap, and what projects need to be in place to enable those initiatives, then we come up with that plan and then start executing against the plan. Again, the plan consists of long-term projects and short-term tactical things. Usually, the first tactical thing is creating a dashboard, just to get some visibility into some of the very important key metrics, and that takes anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, just to get the dashboard ready without doing any underlying information management or data management data plumbing work, right? Without having that data foundation. What we do is we take data from existing systems, whether it's their ERP, production accounting, or reserves or whatever, put it in a place and then give visibility. And then later on, as they have the visibility, then they start questioning. I was like, oh my God, look at all my numbers on, let's say, drilling and completion costs for a given part of the organization in Texas, for example. Why is it this way? And then as they start questioning those, then the importance of the data comes into place, the data quality, as Rothan was talking about earlier. Then we start building the case for the data management piece of this and put the foundation in place. So I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much, Tufan. Rothan, was there anything that you wanted to add on to that before we go on to the next questions?
No, let's go on to the next question.
Great, thanks. One of the next questions was clear back on Rothan, when you were talking about the value-driven success and reducing field error and the amount of value. Let's see if we can go back to, it's actually slide 6. The question was just, is that indicative of what you've seen in your experience? Could you elaborate a little bit more on the deltas that you're able to see and help clients with?
Yeah, absolutely. Over years, what we have seen is, as we were talking about this slide, clients or organizations that are extremely driven by the value that they want that information to provide to the business. And the idea behind this slide is essentially to understand that instead of trying to attack all data attributes, all data that resides in different silos within the organization, identify key data attributes that are used for decision making, that are used to drive operations, that are used to drive innovation within the business, and focus on the quality of those data attributes and try to improve the quality of those. And it goes hand in hand with the concept of fit for purpose. Essentially, different business functions may have different requirements around the quality of data that they consume in terms of their operation. For financial, for folks that are focused on financial results, for business functions that are focused on improving efficiency, they require high quality of data. But for folks that are on business functions, for example, mass marketing within the retail space, the customer data quality may not be as important in terms of the accuracy of that because it's used for a purpose that's much more broader. So the fit for purpose is the one when looked at very closely is actually a key attribute in terms of figuring out what data to attack and how much data.
Thanks, Rothan. Very good. And next, we've had a couple inquiries around the dashboards, and admittedly, Tufan, you could probably do a webinar just for several hours just on the dashboards. But the question is, you talked about creating aligned, active dashboards. How successful have you been in that? Is the gist of the question, or again, how long is that type of just that part of a phase actually doing, and how often do you go back and revisit the metrics on the dashboard?
Actually, this took coming up with this 4 different dashboards took for us around 5 weeks or so. Of course, that's the development phase, right? Coming up with the actual metrics. Okay, what are we going to measure? How often are we going to measure? What are our targets? What are the the low end of 80% target or 120% target? All those ranges. It took a long time because it required many iterations with executives and trying to understand. Taking the strategy, the company strategy, and breaking it all the way down to KPIs, and which KPIs make sense and promotes the right behavior that they want in their organization. So as far as the revisiting, we had to go back on a monthly basis. Every month we published this once a month and made it available to executives. They had to go through and reevaluate, okay, so this really makes sense or not. What's really interesting is it only took 5 weeks for us to develop the dashboards. It took more than 5 months for them to fix their data on the underlying data issues. For example, once we made this data available to executives where they could see part of the company, for example, they drill down from total company down to U.S., from U.S. down to Texas, and from Texas down to, let's say, Barnett Shell. And then they start looking at the spend types on the capital spending on the capital spending dashboard for Barnett, and all of a sudden they see that the capital spending were very choppy because instead of the accounting, we're putting the numbers all into the appropriate months. They would like put it in the month ends of the quarters. For example, in January, February, and March expenses, they would just put it as a one entry in the March, and the March number would jump. And you would not see anything on the April, May, and then June number would jump, and things like that. All of a sudden, it created an exposure to the data quality. And that created additional work on the data management side, right? They had to now go back and fix all that data quality issues that Rothan talked about. It's very important to get all the data right before you can actually make this available to executives. So it was a 5-week effort, and then it took another 5 months to fix the underlying data.
Thanks, Tufan. Again, as questions continue to come in, we will follow up with those offline as we're quickly running out of time. I wanted to let everybody know the next topic in our global series webcast is going to be focused on trading information management, and in the next few weeks we'll have more details to follow. and is rough and is going to begin a series of several focused on the information management topics. So in closing, we'd like to thank everybody again for joining us today and participating in our discussion. We greatly appreciate your feedback, and we're going to, you'll see the survey here shortly. But again, please feel free to contact us through the email that's shown here to learn more about this topic and how SunGard could help you. Thank you again, and goodbye until next month.
And ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us today. At this time, you should be seeing the survey page. Again, your feedback is greatly appreciated. Also, there are several documents you can download by clicking on the Content tab at the bottom of your screen. Have a great afternoon.